Welcome to the Berean Remnant. I'm your host, Dr. Bernard Mauser, and what I want to talk to you today about is how is it that we can best prepare to send our students away from us to college in a way that they're maximally prepared to keep their faith. So I think a lot of us are aware of the statistics. They're pretty bad, that a lot of our children are walking away once they attend college. So they walk away from the faith. They walk away from the values and the things that their parents raised them in. How is it that we as parents can best prepare our children to keep the faith and not just keep it, but flourish in the university system? So I think that there are three things that we have to recognize. Number one, there's a significant problem. Number two, that we can actually do something to adequately prepare them. And three, when we do so, we have to realize that there's competing worldviews. So with the competing worldviews, we can actually help them sift through what is true, what is not, what is philosophy, and what is fact. And so once we do that, it'll help us best prepare our kids. Now, it may be the case that you're a college student right now and you're going through and you're trying to sift through these things. I think after you listen to some of what I have to say today, you're going to be significantly better prepared, not only to stand in the face of persecution and opposing worldviews, but to really flourish through those things. So, according to a Lifeway study, and there's a lot of studies you can look up online, but this was probably, 2014, Lifeway did a study looking at the number of students that walk away from the faith. And at that time, it was 7 in 10. So 70% of our students, when they leave us, if you're in youth ministry or if you're a parent, they leave us once they go to college. They walk away from the church, never to return. What can we do to best prepare our students to maybe reverse these numbers so that 7 in 10 don't? Maybe we could even do better than that. I think there's a lot of things we can do, and that's what I want to talk to you today about. So something that I've had a lot of parents ask me, how do I find a good college for my kids where they're not going to leave the faith? Well, you can't guarantee it no matter where they go. They could go to one of the best Christian institutions on the planet and still choose to walk away. And I think what a lot of parents do, maybe you're a parent who actually struggles with a couple kids who have walked away, or a child who you love so much you can't imagine your life apart from them, and yet they've walked away from the faith. Realize that first, it's not necessarily something that you did or didn't do that caused them to walk away from the faith. The perfect Father in heaven lost a third of the angels because of another factor. So it's not necessarily even something that you've done. If the perfect Father in heaven, and all of us are imperfect as parents, if the perfect Father in heaven lost a third of the angels, you might have been a perfect parent. I know a lot of us beat ourselves up because we can think of, okay, what have I done wrong in raising my children? But there's this aspect of free will. What we really want to focus on is going forward, what can we do to best prepare our kids? What is the underlying problem? And what's an adequate solution that we can give to best prepare them or to best prepare ourselves? So something we have to realize up front is in every discipline, there are Christians who have terminal degrees in that discipline. There are people who have been able to sift through the information, still make A's, and end up with terminal degrees in medicine, in biology, in astrophysics, in physics, in chemistry, in philosophy. How is it that some of these disciplines are a little more hostile to Christianity than others? There's Christians in the realm of psychology, sociology, you name it, you'll find Christians who are very solid in the foundation of their Christian faith, and yet They're some of the leading experts in their field. And one of the things I would suggest that we need to be aware of up front is that there's a distinction we can make between the philosophy of each of these disciplines and some of the philosophical assumptions within them, and the facts of the discipline. What is it you can actually know and study from the discipline, and you could conclude about maybe the way the hormones interact with the body, or the mathematics associated with whatever your discipline is. We can sift out the realm of facts from some of the bad philosophy that has tainted some of these professions. For those who are able to do so, you're really able to flourish and embrace the truths of the faith. The reason is, in each of these disciplines, insofar as what they've discovered corresponds to reality, and it's true, these are just aspects of general revelation that God has revealed, that you're figuring out the way the world is operated in certain ways. We can separate that from some of the hostile philosophical assumptions that have crept in to each of these disciplines. Those who are best able to do that are best able to maintain their faith, make the grades they need to make, rather than trying to recreate some of the ideas that Hollywood has shown us, maybe in God's Not Dead. No philosophy professor is going to hand over his classroom to allow your Christian kid to make a defense for the faith. The main audience for your Christian students as they go there, and if you are a student, the main people you're likely to persuade, they're not going to be the professors, though you might be able to get in some grains of truth, some nuggets, some pebbles in their shoe. For the most part, it's your peers that you want to try to think about interacting with and persuading that Christianity is true. And so those are the ones whose ears you have. That's your audience. That is your sphere of influence. Once you realize that, now you can go really far by realizing who the burden of proof is on. So when the professor makes a philosophical claim, if you ask them a question about a philosophical claim they're making, by them making the philosophical claim, the burden of proof is on them to prove it. So you asking a question, you don't actually have to give an argument. The professor may try to turn the burden of proof back upon you. So maybe it is the case that your biology teacher says something like, well, everybody knows that the Bible's full of contradictions. Okay, you're a biology professor. You know a lot about the Bible. You have got a master's degree in Bible too while you're teaching biology. So something should be off about this to your student if they're discerning, like, okay, this isn't your field, this isn't your discipline. It would not necessarily be wrong for your student, or you, if you're in this class where your biology professor says something like this, to raise your hand and ask the question, well, you just said there's a lot of contradictions in the Bible. Can you give me a handful of these that I've heard this claim, but I've actually never heard what are some of the contradictions? Most of the time, what the professor is going to do is they're going to try to say, oh, you think you could defend the Bible, and they're going to try to make fun of you. So prove the Bible is right. I'll give you 30 seconds. Go. Prove to me. You've made no claim at that point. You've asked a question. You might even be an atheist and agree with their position. They don't know your view. And so you're not trying to be hostile or disrespectful. They're the one who made the claim. And so it's okay to say, Professor, I've made no claim. You said it's full of contradictions. I'm just wondering what those are. So it's okay to play the part of, I'm just a genuine questioner. I'm just wondering what you think those are. And then if you get some that are really difficult to answer, or even that you can answer on the spot, you don't have to answer those on the spot. But what you could do is reach out to some of your peers later after you go do some research, or even maybe you know them off the top of your head. After you leave the class, you could say to some of your peers, do you remember Professor so-and-so said these things? And you could start explaining how these are not real contradictions. So realize where the burden of proof lies. This is just one of your tactical ways to survive. But learning tactics like that is going to be something you can get from networking with Christian apologists and supporting them. So what I would recommend doing if you are a student or if you're a parent who has students that you're getting ready to send away to college, is plug into some apologetics ministries. Get your student involved or be involved in some of those. Maybe have your student, wherever they're going to college, look into the local Ratio Christi. A lot of these universities have college campus clubs where they learn how to defend the faith more effectively. And there's trained apologists overseeing these different ministries where, hey, my professor actually brought up this really good objection. How do I answer that? A lot of the leaders of your Ratio Christi can answer the main objections. And there's an entire network we have with people with terminal degrees in every one of these fields. If they don't know the answer, they can find out due to our vast network. So that's one of the practical things that you can do. So you equip your kids in Christian apologetics from a young age, but then don't assume that either your apologetic muscles, if you're a student, are bigger than they actually are, or that your kids are. They have bigger apologetic muscles than they actually have. So one of the best bits of advice that I've tried to give over the years, and I've seen other Christian apologists recommend this, for every book you're reading of the opposing view, read 2 or 3 from your view that respond to your opponent's position. If you're only imbibing texts from the New Atheist, for example, and that's all you're reading is the New Atheist, and none of the responses to the New Atheist, you'll start buying more and more into it. It's hard not to be poisoned by that. So it helps you remain inoculated from some of the bad arguments. I'm not saying don't read any of their material. Definitely read their material. Try to sift through the arguments if you feel that you are adequately prepared to do so. I'm not going to tell any adult not to do that. But at the same time, make sure you're imbibing some of the responses from the best minds that we have. So we could all realize that, especially as the body of Christ, all of us have different gifts in the body of Christ. Not everybody's gift is going to be in the same area. So somebody who already has a terminal degree in astrophysics is going to understand how to respond to an atheist astrophysicist better than those of us that don't have that. So don't think you have to have robust apologetics muscles in every single area of apologetics in order to know some things. For the most part, what you're going to encounter in college are actually really low-level apologetics questions. You're not going to get a lot of sophisticated apologetics arguments, at least in my 19 years of being in college classes. I didn't, even though with several atheistic philosophy professors who I thought were brilliant in a lot of ways, some good professors. For the most part, their arguments against God's existence were very low-level apologetics. That's all you would need to answer their arguments. They were not real sophisticated in their arguments against God's existence. So realize the anti-Christian worldview. Now, here's one of the main concerns I've gotten pushback from, and this is not necessarily from non-Christians, it's from Christians. And what they do is they'll cite Colossians 2:8. And this is major Christian theologians and pastors who have a lot of good teaching. But they're really concerned because Colossians 2:8 seems to give a warning against studying philosophy. And what I would suggest you do anytime anybody brings up any scripture is read it in context. Okay, so here's the context of Colossians 2:8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. So the concern here is, see to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. And so what they take this as is a condemnation against studying any type of philosophy. And of course, that's not what's going on if you actually look at the rest of the passage. So keep in mind what it's saying. How is it that I could avoid being taken captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy? One of the things I would say is know good philosophy, being able to discern what's good and bad. But what is the hollow and deceptive philosophy that Paul is warning the Colossians against in Colossians 2? So he tells you not to be taken captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy. What type of philosophy is this? Well, this is the kind that depends on human tradition and the elemental spiritual forces of this world rather than on Christ. Now, if you look a little further down in Colossians 2 and start in verse 20, you get more of this context. Since you died with Christ to the elemental spiritual forces of this world. See, that's a parallel to Colossians 2:8. You died with Christ to the elemental spiritual forces of this world. Why? As though you still belong to it, do you submit to its rules? Do not handle, do not taste, do not touch. These rules, which have to do with things that are destined to perish with use, are based on merely human commands and teachings. Such regulations indeed have an appearance of wisdom with their self-imposed worship, their false humility, and their harsh treatment of the body, but they lack any value in restraining sensual indulgence. What is the hollow and captive and deceptive philosophy that could take you captive and basically submit you to the elemental spiritual forces of the world? It's legalism. It's that you're going to be able to follow the law, and you need to follow the law. If you follow the law, you're going to overcome all these temptations. That's what he's condemning there in the context. It's not a condemnation against studying any philosophy. As a matter of fact, it's the Eastern view to attack the life of the mind. That would be the strategy of the devil. If I were the devil and I wanted to take away a Christian's witness and effectiveness, what would I do? I would attack their mind. Let them not sift out what is true, what is false. Keep them from being discerning. Take away their ability to logically analyze things, to sift through different worldviews and the implications therein. That has much more to do with an Eastern worldview than a Christian worldview. So Christians who use Colossians 2:8 to beat up anybody who's a philosopher, or in your desire to study elements of philosophy to be more effective in sharing your faith, this itself is an anti-Christian view, I would submit. So those are some things to keep in mind. We're already in our culture, for the most part, there's a major part of the culture that has imbibed the false philosophy that's propagated by the universities. Our universities tend to be havens of Marxism, of critical theory, of naturalism, atheism. There's also an Eastern strand starting to weave its way through, sometimes through some of the New Age teaching. And so these are bad philosophies and worldviews that we actually have to be discerning of. Once we're discerning of them, then you can actually sift out, okay, what are they saying that's factual, that actually corresponds to reality? And what's philosophical, that's contrary to my Christian worldview? And once you start understanding those things, it helps you be inoculated against losing the faith. And that's what we want. Remember what Jesus says is the greatest commandment: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind, and all your strength. The most effective way to do that is to train your mind, make it sharper, develop the logical tools you need, study different books on worldview, read good Christian authors who are making arguments against the philosophies of the day. And in so doing, you're equipping yourself. You can more effectively impact your realm of influence. And then we always want to be discipling one or two other people at least. For those of us that have children, we want to be discipling our children, imparting the truths of the faith to them, but not just the truths of the faith. How do I answer objections to these truths of the faith? So one of the main critical components that is seeped into a lot of our seminaries has to do with criticism. And you'll see this through 19th century biblical criticism that a lot of evangelicals have imbibed. But some of the main seminaries in America have imbibed this liberal theology as well. And what's common to all of them is a questioning of the Bible, number one. So whereas in American law, we think that a person should be considered innocent until proven guilty, but we have a different standard when it comes to the Bible. We think the Bible needs to prove that it's true before we find it's innocent. But if we develop the same approach to the Bible that we have for American common law, that the Bible is innocent until proven guilty, you give it the benefit of the doubt, your faith is going to be radically reinforced when you actually start looking at the evidence. One of the things that liberal theologians have taught in a lot of these seminaries is that the Bible is full of contradictions. And this is something that's propagated by a lot of professors whose area isn't necessarily the Bible. They'll just say these things without actually ever finding any, or maybe they have one or two real superficial ones that are very easy to answer. This is part of the liberal philosophy that these liberal theologians have imbibed. They'll say that Jesus wasn't actually really a good teacher or a good man in a lot of ways, and they call into question a lot of the miracles that are done in the Bible. So there's what's called an anti-supernatural bias. Why is there anti-supernatural bias? Because they presuppose or they assume that miracles aren't possible. But if God exists, then automatically miracles are possible. What's your argument that God doesn't exist? If he exists, then he has the power to do miracles. It's question begging to assume otherwise. So what's the argument that he can't? You shouldn't develop these anti-supernatural biases, but as part of a lot of their exposition, this is built in. These are anti-Christian philosophical assumptions. It's the philosophy that'll help you sift out that and what is right and wrong about these things. So I think one of the best insights I've ever read about this matter of studying philosophy is given by C.S. Lewis. He has this work called Learning in Wartime. He wrote this when he's delivering a chapel in Oxford to a lot of his students who are wondering, why is it that I have to keep going to Oxford and learning while my brothers and my cousins and my friends are fighting Nazis? Shouldn't I be participating in war to save England, to save human civilization? And in his Learning in Wartime, which is an incredible work, if you haven't read it, it's a really short sermon he delivers to his students. But when it comes to philosophy, he says this one specific thing, and I think it's worth quoting. If all the world were Christian, it might not matter if all the world were uneducated. But as it is, a cultural life will not exist outside the church, whether it exists inside or not. To be ignorant and simple now, not to be able to meet the enemies on their own ground, would be to throw down our weapons and betray our uneducated brethren who have under God no defense but us against the intellectual attacks of the heathen. Good philosophy must exist, if for no other reason, because bad philosophy needs to be answered. The cool intellect must work not only against cool intellect on the other side, but against the muddy heathen mysticisms which deny intellect altogether. And so here you have Lewis capturing part of the reason it's so important for us to continue our education for those who are pursuing the life of the mind, especially those who are Bereans among us, that we love the Word of God. We want to defend the Bible. We want to find out what is true and what corresponds to reality. Good philosophy has to exist, if for no other reason, but to what? Defend our uneducated brothers, to respond to the bad philosophy by the intellectuals on the other side, and to respond to the pagan mysticism and the Eastern mysticism which denies intellect altogether. We need to be able to do these things. So this is my admonition to pursue apologetics while you're in the university, while you're going through it. Look up, okay, what are some of our leading lights in these fields? I need to know not only, and now this is a higher bar that we have to set for ourselves, we need to know not only our position, but we have to know the other person's position. We have to be able to get those A's. I need to be able to answer the professor, but at the same time, I have to just as robustly understand what is our view on this. You get your degree, but at the same time, you can articulate their position better than they can and explain what's wrong with it. That's where we have to try to position ourselves to the best of our ability. You're not going to find this type of pushback in every discipline. We have to realize that it's seeped into some disciplines significantly more than others. Engineers aren't going to spend a whole lot of time on pondering Marxist maxims because they're basically saving people's lives in the way they develop our civilization with the materials that they're able to develop in significant ways that they can improve the structure of buildings to withstand earthquakes and hurricanes and things of this nature. Not every discipline's going to have that. In medicine, we could separate, okay, these are things that actually have to do with healing the human body, and these are philosophical assumptions that aren't necessarily needed for understanding the way the human body works. We could try to sift out those two things. In doing that, you yourself, if you're a student, you're going to be more equipped. If you're training your student, they're going to be more equipped and more likely to make it through. What are some great resources that we can access? The Universe Next Door is a great book on a worldview catalog by James Sire. Nancy Pearcey's Total Truth, another excellent resource. Nancy Pearcey, she has a lot of excellent resources that we can imbibe. Norm Geisler's Christian Apologetics book, also an incredible resource. If you're looking for some fantastic schools as it relates to these, there's a lot of schools with different apologetics programs, but I can't recommend Southern Evangelical Seminary highly enough. It's an incredible institution for defending inerrancy and the Word of God. We even have certificate programs. And so come study with some of the leading Christian apologetics at SES. If nothing else, come to some of the apologetics conferences. There's great apologetics conferences all over the country as well. And so what you'll find are little pools of Christian apologetics being done throughout the country. Stand to Reason has some great resources as well, some great apologists. So plug yourself into the apologetics community, understand what the different groups are teaching, try to discern what is true and what is not, and support ministries that are doing apologetics as well. It's very, very impactful for the Christian community and to help defend right doctrine. So just as we support evangelists, so too we should be supporting apologists. What you tend to find is a lot of people want to support evangelists and missionaries who are out in the field. I'm not saying don't support them, but consider expanding your support to areas where people are actively doing apologetics. If you know an apologist that's really blessed you, reach out to them. Ask what you could do to support their ministry. And these are ways that you can help continue to support the Christian intellectual life, especially for those that are on the front lines of defending the faith. So to summarize what we could do, plug into the apologetics community, build your mind to be equipped to stand for the faith, invest in the apologetics resources that are available, support the apologists you love, listen to their podcasts, buy their books, go to the conferences where they speak. What you tend to find is a lot of people want to support evangelists and missionaries who are out in the field. I'm not saying don't support them, but consider expanding your support to areas where people are actively doing apologetics. If you know an apologist that's really blessed you, reach out to them. Ask what you could do to support their ministry. And these are ways that you can help continue to support the Christian intellectual life, especially for those that are on the front lines of defending the faith. So I hope you have taken some good things away from this and that you're encouraged in ways that you can actually actively disciple, be equipped, and if you're a student going through these things, maybe look at what are my next steps. Tap into Oratio Christi. Look up Christian apologists online. You could find answers in every single field, no matter what you're studying, of people who've got PhDs, who's got MDs, who have terminal degrees, or whatever you're studying. and they still are very solid in their Christian faith. So I hope you've enjoyed this, Bereans. You'll like and subscribe, and have a fantastic day.